All right, let's jump straight into this explainer. Today, we're stepping right into the high-stakes world of sports analytics. We're going to solve one of the absolute most persistent challenges in advanced language coaching, which is bridging that massive gap between B2 conversational fluency and true C1 executive-level precision. Because let's face it, when your students are sitting in a boardroom or they're presenting to a highly critical sporting director, basic guesswork just doesn't cut it anymore. So we're going to look at exactly how to teach tactical speculation and probability, but with absolute linguistic authority.
So think of me as your head coach today. Here's our training schedule. We'll start off with the tactical diagnostic, open up the speculation playbook, master those advanced syntactic rules, hit the practice stage, and finally, we'll test the whole shebang in the boardroom crisis.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1, the tactical diagnostic, where we are exposing the absolute limits of B2 speculation.
Picture this. You're presenting a super complex tactical projection board to your class. The opponents, well, they're sitting in a low block, and your midfielders are actively suffering from cumulative physical stress. If you ask a B2 student to assess this situation, they'll probably look at it and say something like, "We might win, but maybe we will get tired." And hey, it's accurate, sure, but I want you to compare that to this. In all likelihood, the high allostatic load could conceivably trigger defensive lapses. The contrast is literally night and day, right? Basic words like might and maybe just completely lack analytical weight. C1 requires true executive phrasing.
Moving right along to Section 2, the speculation playbook. These are your core C1 structures.
So, let's introduce these core structures to our students like they are these star players on the pitch. At this elite level, lexical choices don't just guess. They instantly communicate highly precise, data-backed probabilities. Notice how may well sits way up there at around 85% certainty. Then could conceivably drops down to about 40%. And faint possibility, that's way down at a mere 10%. See, we are moving totally beyond simple guesswork here, straight into data-driven semantics. Let's break down exactly how to teach these specific structures.
We're going to use the MPFU framework for this. That's meaning, pronunciation, form, and use. First up, we've got our heavy hitters, may well. Signals a solid 80 to 90% certainty based on strong evidence. But notice the pronunciation piece here. It's absolutely crucial. You have to teach students to stress the word well to really project that confidence. Then we have in all likelihood, which is this fantastic adverbial modifier that's just perfect for corporate or academic reporting. The trick to making this sound natural is the smooth phonetic linking. You want to glide that L sound of all directly into likelihood.
Next up, we have 3 more absolutely essential structures. Chances are is phenomenal for fluid, everyday corporate talk, but you've got to teach that strong liaison so it flows together nicely, kind of like chances are. Next, could conceivably covers our 30 to 50% theoreticals, and to get it right, it requires an extremely weak schwa sound right in the middle. And finally, for those super rare 5 to 15% edge cases, we use a faint possibility. You really want to ensure your students use a glottal stop on the T in faint so they can transition smoothly right into the word possibility.
All right, Section 3, Advanced Syntactic Rules. Let's look at the actual boundaries of C1 competence.
Now, what's really interesting about this is that vocabulary alone just isn't enough. To achieve true CEFR C1 competence, those underlying lower-level grammatical boundaries literally have to be upgraded. A massive key marker of C1 accuracy is the modal interrogative restriction, basically knowing that may cannot be used to ask questions about possibility. For instance, saying, "May it be that our tactics are failing?" is entirely incorrect. You must train them to use "could it be" or "is it likely?" The only real exception is using might, like in "might they adjust their line?" But keep in mind that is strictly reserved for highly formal or literary registers.
Let's see how this builds when we bring in syntactic concessions. Advanced speakers actively use speculative modals as discourse structuring tools. The formula goes like this: subject plus may or might not plus the verb followed by but. So for example, you'd say, "Our defensive structure may not be the highest in the league, but it prevents critical lapses." See what happens there? It allows the speaker to brilliantly concede a minor point right before asserting a major tactical advantage. It's a real game changer. And you also absolutely need to train your students to distinguish between epistemic and dynamic modals. A tight defensive block could prove difficult, expresses an epistemic or purely theoretical possibility. But compare that to, "We can break this block." That represents a dynamic modal, which signals an actual real-world tactical ability to execute a plan.
If a speaker confuses these two in a boardroom, well, they're going to sound like they don't even know their own team's capabilities.
Okay, Section 4, the practice stage. Time for some C1 sentence transformations.
So, I'm going to put you in the shoes of the language coach right now for some rapid-fire transformations. We're upgrading amateur phrasing into sharp, executive C1 language. Here is your student's first attempt. I think it's possible, though highly unlikely, that our players will suffer from cumulative fatigue. It's wordy, it's kind of clunky, and it is firmly planted in B2 territory. So how do we tighten this up to express a highly unlikely event?
Boom. Check out the C1 upgrade. There is a faint possibility that our players will suffer from high carga allostatica. Notice how we seamlessly integrated the target structure, a faint possibility, with the highly specialized analytical term, carga allostatica. It's much cleaner, incredibly professional, and it instantly commands respect in a sports science meeting. All right, let's try another one. This time the student wants to talk about a highly probable defensive collapse. They say, "It is very probable that their defensive setup will collapse under our intense pressing." Again, it's not grammatically wrong, but very probable just screams textbook intermediate English.
And here is the C1 upgrade. Our intense PPDA may well collapse their defensive block. We took intense pressing and swapped it out for the exact quantitative metric, PPDA, which is passes allowed per defensive action. Then we paired it with may well to confidently signal that 80 to 90% probability, completely based on hard data.
Okay, last practice sentence. The student is talking about theoretical scoring chances, and they give you this. It is theoretically possible to score if we keep crossing the ball into their box. I mean, it sounds like they're reading straight from a dictionary, right? We need this to sound like a cutting-edge, high-stakes tactical briefing.
And here is the transformation. We could conceivably score if we maintain a sustained assadio perimetral. We take that 30 to 50% probability structure, could conceivably, and we pair it directly with the advanced tactical concept of a sustained perimeter siege, or assadio perimetral. This right here, this is exactly how a sporting director actually speaks.
Now, just a really quick aside on register. Because C1 isn't just about sounding smart. It's about being appropriate for the room you're in. Using may well, combined with Latinate metrics like escalation, belongs strictly in the formal executive boardroom. But if you're giving an informal locker room briefing, the idiomatic chances are, paired with everyday phrasal verbs like get tired, is actually the more natural, and therefore the more advanced, choice.
Finally, Section 5, the boardroom crisis. This is all about active production under pressure.
All right, this is match day. Your students have the vocabulary, they have the grammar down, but can they actually deploy it under high-pressure, rapid-fire interjections from a skeptical club president? Let's simulate that pressure test. Imagine the club president leans right over the table and fires this at your student. How certain are you that our key playmaker can withstand this cumulative physical stress? In a split second, they have to make a choice. Are they expressing high evidence using may well, or do they need to issue a theoretical warning using could conceivably?
Then, question 2 comes in hot. What are the odds of our opponents breaking our high press? This is the perfect moment to coach your student to use that syntactic concession we learned earlier. They should elegantly reply with something like, they might not break our primary line easily, but there's a faint possibility of transitional exposure.
And then comes the final, absolute most complex question. If we abandon our high-intensity press to protect the player's health, what happens to our defensive projections? Here, the student has to seamlessly integrate a confident modifier like, in all likelihood, with real predictive metrics, things like expected goals against or expected value, just to defend their entire strategy.
So this whole explainer really highlights one major takeaway. C1 mastery isn't just about knowing a bunch of big words. It's about deploying highly precise probabilities to manage risk, persuade stakeholders, and ultimately survive executive scrutiny. After mapping out these semantics, mastering the phonetics, and practicing those syntactic concessions, I want to leave you with this thought. The next time your student walks into a high-stakes presentation, will they be guessing or will they be dictating the tactical reality? Take this Champions League intensity right into your next language coaching session and just watch them thrive.